disturbing. Tonight, we are plunging into the dark heart of the Appalachian Mountains with some truly unsettling true horror stories that will keep you up all night, if you're brave enough. Smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next descent into fear. Now, get comfortable, relax. I've been working nights in the Cherokee National Forest for about 12 years now. Started as a seasonal fire lookout, worked my way up to a full-time ranger position. Most people think it's lonely work, sitting up in those towers or patrolling empty trails after dark, but honestly, I prefer it. The woods at night have their own rhythm. You learn to read the sounds, the way an owl calls differently when there's weather coming, how the wind changes pitch when it moves through different types of trees. It becomes background music after a while. My sector covers about 30 square miles of some of the most remote wilderness left in eastern Tennessee. We're talking deep hollows where cell service dies completely, ridges that haven't seen a human footprint in months. The kind of place where you can walk for hours, and the only signs of civilization are the occasional airplane passing overhead. I like it that way. People bring complications. The forest just is what it is. Most of my shifts are routine. I'll do a patrol route that takes me to 3 different fire towers, check some remote campsites, maybe investigate a report of illegal camping or hunting. Between patrols, I monitor radio traffic and do paperwork. The night shift exists mostly because of fire danger. Someone needs to be watching for lightning strikes or illegal campfires that could spark a blaze. But in 12 years, I've responded to maybe 6 actual emergencies. Mostly it's just me, the trees, and the quiet. The thing about working alone in the wilderness is that you develop a kind of sixth sense for when something's off. Your brain catalogs the normal patterns, where the deer trails are, which areas the black bears frequent, how the landscape sounds during different seasons. When something breaks that pattern, you notice it immediately. It's not mystical or anything. It's just survival instinct that most people don't need to develop anymore. So when I first saw the light, I noticed it. This was late September, about 2 months ago. I was doing my 2 a.m. patrol, hiking the ridge trail that connects the Cataract Tower to the old fire road. Clear night, no moon, perfect visibility. I just reached the halfway point when I caught a glimpse of light down in Dutchman's Hollow, maybe a mile southeast of my position. It looked like a lantern, not a flashlight or headlamp. Those have a harsh white LED quality that cuts through darkness like a blade. This was warm, yellow light that seemed to glow rather than shine. Old-fashioned looking, like the kind of oil lantern my grandfather used to keep in his tool shed. My first thought was camper. Dutchman's Hollow isn't an official campsite, but it's not technically illegal either. Just discouraged because it's so remote. If someone got lost or had car trouble, they might end up camping there. The light was stationary, which suggested someone had set up for the night. I made a note to check it out on my return trip, but when I came back through an hour later, the light was gone. I scanned the hollow with my binoculars. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint outline of trees. I figured whoever it was had turned in for the night. Happens all the time. 3 nights later, I saw it again. Same location, same yellow glow. This time I was prepared. I had my good binoculars and took a careful look. The light appeared to be hanging about 8 feet off the ground, swaying slightly like it was suspended from a branch. But I couldn't make out any details. The trees were too thick, and it was still almost a mile away. I decided to investigate. The quickest route to Dutchman's Hollow was to descend the ridge and follow Cedar Creek downstream. It would take me about 30 minutes to get there. I radioed my location and started down the trail. The hike down was normal. Cedar Creek was running low. We'd had a dry spell in late summer, but I could hear it trickling over the rocks. A screech owl called from somewhere upstream. Normal night sounds. I wasn't being particularly quiet, but I wasn't crashing through the underbrush either. Just walking at a steady pace like I would during any patrol. About halfway to the hollow, the sound stopped. At first I didn't register it consciously, but after a few more minutes the silence became obvious. No creek sounds, no insects, No wind through the leaves, just my footsteps and breathing. I stopped walking and listened. Complete silence. Not even my own heartbeat, which you can usually hear in your ears when it's truly quiet. I've experienced this kind of silence before, but only a few times. Usually right before severe weather, when the atmospheric pressure drops and every animal in the forest goes to ground. But the weather, that night was perfect. Clear sky, no wind, temperature in the low 60s. No reason for the forest to go silent. I continued toward the hollow, moving more carefully now. The silence stayed with me. As I got closer to where I'd seen the light, I started feeling cold. Not autumn cold. This was different. Like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the span of a few hundred yards. My breath started showing in the air, even though it had been comfortable just minutes before. The light was still there when I reached the edge of the hollow. It was hanging from what looked like a hickory tree, about 15 feet from where I stood. Up close, it was definitely a lantern. Old-fashioned glass chimney, metal base. The works. The flame inside flickered like a real oil flame, casting moving shadows on the ground below. But there was no smoke. Oil lanterns produce smoke, especially old ones. This one burned clean, like it was running on some kind of gas, and it was hanging from nothing. I could see the tree branch it appeared to be suspended from, but there was no rope, no chain, no wire. The lantern just hung in the air below the branch, swaying gently. I approached slowly, keeping my flashlight off. The cold got more intense with each step. By the time I was 10 feet away, I could see my breath clearly. The temperature had to be near freezing, which was impossible. The hollow was sheltered from wind, but even so, temperature doesn't just drop 40 degrees in a localized area without a reason. The ground around the lantern was bare. No footprints, no disturbed leaves, no camping gear. If someone had been here, they'd left no trace at all. I walked a complete circle around the tree, looking for any sign of human presence. Nothing, just the lantern, hanging impossibly in the cold air. I tried to approach the lantern itself, but something stopped me at about 5 feet. Not a physical barrier, just an overwhelming sense that I shouldn't get any closer. The kind of instinctive caution you feel when you encounter a large predator. Your body just knows to stop moving. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just watching. The flame continued to flicker normally. The lantern continued to sway. But the longer I watched, the more convinced I became that something was watching me back. Not the lantern itself. Something else. Something using the lantern as a lure or a signal. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the light until I reached the tree line. Then I turned and walked back to the creek, fighting the urge to run. The silence followed me for about half the distance, then gradually the normal night sounds returned. By the time I reached the ridge trail, I could hear the creek again. I didn't report the incident. What would I have said? That I found a floating lantern that disappeared when I got too close? That the forest went silent and the temperature dropped for no reason? I'd worked too long to risk my credibility on something I couldn't explain. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few days, I researched everything I could about Dutchman's Hollow. The name dates back to the 1800s, when a family of German immigrants settled in the area. They disappeared during the winter of 1847. No bodies found, no sign of violence, no indication of where they went. They just vanished, leaving behind their cabin and all their possessions. The area was avoided by local tribes even before the settlers arrived, though the historical record doesn't say why. I told myself it was probably some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. Temperature inversions can create optical illusions. Swamp gas can produce lights that appear to float. There are documented cases of ball lightning persisting for several minutes. Reasonable explanations existed for what I'd seen, but I knew I'd seen something else, something that didn't fit any of those explanations. The light appeared again 4 nights later. This time I was ready. I'd brought a thermal camera borrowed from the wildlife department, a digital camera with a long lens, and a portable weather station. If there was a natural explanation, I was going to document it. I set up my equipment on the ridge and waited. The light appeared at exactly 1:47 a.m., same location as before. Through the thermal camera, the area showed normal temperature readings. The light itself didn't register on thermal at all. No heat signature, no temperature differential. According to the instruments, there was nothing there. But I could see it clearly with my naked eyes. The same yellow glow, the same gentle swaying motion. I took dozens of photographs, but when I reviewed them later, they showed only darkness. The digital camera couldn't capture what I was seeing. I decided to approach again, this time bringing the instruments with me. The descent into the hollow played out exactly like before. Gradual silence, dropping temperature, the sense of being observed. The portable weather station confirmed what I was feeling. Temperature dropped from 61 degrees Fahrenheit at the ridge to 34 degrees near the lantern. Humidity increased to nearly 100%. Air pressure showed readings that shouldn't have been possible at our elevation. The lantern was exactly where it had been before. Still no smoke, still no visible means of support, still flickering with that steady, hypnotic flame. I took more photographs, knowing they wouldn't show anything. I recorded video with my phone, knowing it would be useless. The instruments registered impossible readings, but they couldn't capture the source. I spent an hour in the hollow that night, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing. The cold was so intense that I started shivering uncontrollably. The silence was so complete that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. And through it all, the lantern just hung there, swaying slightly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But it was the sense of being watched that eventually drove me away. Not just observed, studied, like something was taking notes on my behavior, learning from my reactions. I've been around predators enough to recognize that feeling. Bears, cougars, even wild dogs will watch you with that same focused attention. But this was different. More patient, more intelligent. I left the hollow that night with more questions than answers. The instruments had recorded data that made no sense. The photographs showed nothing, and I was no closer to understanding what I'd encountered. Over the following weeks, I developed a routine. Every third or fourth night, I'd check the hollow. The light appeared about half the time, always in the same location, always with the same characteristics. I started keeping detailed logs: time of appearance, duration, weather conditions, my own physical reactions. I was hoping to find a pattern, some kind of predictable variable that would help explain what was happening. But the more data I collected, the more convinced I became that this wasn't a natural phenomenon. The light appeared regardless of weather conditions. It showed up during the new moon and the full moon with equal frequency. Temperature, humidity, and air pressure at the site remained consistently abnormal whenever the light was present. Most importantly, the light seemed to respond to my presence. If I arrived at the ridge early and watched the hollow, the light would appear within minutes. If I was late, it would wait. If I didn't come at all, other rangers reported seeing it from different vantage points around the same time I usually made my checks. It was as if the light was keeping to my schedule, appearing when it expected me to be watching. The breakthrough came in early November. I was doing my usual observation routine when I noticed something different. The light appeared in its normal location, but after about 10 minutes it began moving. Not swaying, actually moving horizontally through the trees. I watched it travel slowly along the creek bed, weaving between the trunks like it was following a path. I parallel tracked it from the ridge, using my binoculars to keep it in sight. The light moved at a steady pace, maybe 2 miles per hour, stopping occasionally as if it were checking something or waiting for me to catch up. After about 20 minutes, it stopped in a small clearing about half a mile downstream from its usual location. I decided to investigate. By now, I'd made the descent into the hollow enough times that I could do it in almost complete darkness. I knew every root, every loose stone, every low-hanging branch. I could get to the creek in 15 minutes without making a sound. But when I reached the clearing where the light had stopped, it was gone. Not just invisible, gone. The clearing was empty, no trace of its presence, but something had changed. In the center of the clearing, someone had arranged a small pile of stones, not stacked, arranged, in a pattern that looked almost like an arrow, pointing deeper into the forest. The stones were local fieldstone, the kind you'd find in any creek bed. But they'd been placed carefully, deliberately, and they were warm to the touch, despite the ambient temperature being near freezing. When I disturbed the arrangement, the stones underneath were dry, while the ground around them was damp with condensation. I followed the direction the stones pointed, deeper into the hollow than I'd ever been. The creek curved sharply to the left, and the trees grew thicker. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I saw it again. The same yellow glow, but now it was ahead of me instead of above me, close to ground level, moving slowly through the trees like it was floating just above the forest floor. I followed it for what felt like hours. The light would move forward, stop, wait for me to catch up, then move forward again, leading me deeper into the forest, away from my patrol route, away from any area I'd ever mapped or explored. The cold and silence followed us, creating a bubble of impossible conditions that moved with the light. Eventually, we reached another clearing. This one was larger, maybe 50 feet across, with a ring of old-growth oak trees around the perimeter. In the center of the clearing was a stone foundation, the remains of an old building. The light stopped directly above the foundation and began to pulse, growing brighter and dimmer in a steady rhythm. I approached carefully. The foundation was old, probably mid-1800s construction, hand-cut stones fitted together without mortar, the way German immigrants used to build. This had to be the original homestead, the one that belonged to the family that disappeared in 1847. I'd found the Dutchman's cabin. The light pulsed above the foundation for several minutes, then began to fade. Not like a flame being extinguished, like it was simply choosing to become invisible. Within 30 seconds, it was gone completely, leaving me alone in the clearing with only my flashlight for illumination. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it watching me from the tree line. Not malevolent exactly, but not benign either. Patient. Calculating. Like it had shown me something important and was waiting to see what I would do with the information. I spent another hour in the clearing, examining the foundation and the surrounding area. No camping gear, no footprints, no signs of recent human activity. But I found more stone arrangements, small cairns placed at regular intervals around the foundation's perimeter. Each one was warm to the touch, despite the freezing air temperature. When I finally left the clearing, I felt like I was being followed, not pursued, accompanied. The sense of being watched stayed with me all the way back to the creek, up the ridge, and almost to my truck. Only when I reached the fire road did the feeling fade. I didn't sleep well that night, or the next night, or the night after that. I kept thinking about the foundation, the stone arrangements, the way the light had led me there so deliberately, like it was trying to tell me something, like it wanted me to understand something about what had happened in that clearing. I started researching the German family more thoroughly. Most of the historical records were sketchy, but I found some references in the county archives. The Zimmermann family, Heinrich, his wife Anna, and their 3 children. They'd bought 160 acres in the hollow in 1845, built a cabin, cleared some land for farming. Neighbors described them as hardworking, quiet people who kept to themselves. The last recorded sighting was in November 1847. A traveling merchant noted that smoke was still rising from their chimney, and their livestock was still in the pasture. But when he stopped to trade, no one answered the door. He assumed they were away and continued on his route. When he passed through again 2 weeks later, the cabin was empty. No signs of violence, no indication of where they'd gone. Their livestock was dead, apparently from starvation and exposure. Local authorities investigated, but found nothing. The cabin was intact, their possessions were undisturbed, and there were no tracks leading away from the homestead. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. Eventually, the property was abandoned. The cabin fell into ruins, and the forest reclaimed the clearing. But here's what bothered me. The merchant's account mentioned that the cabin was still warm when he investigated. The fire had burned down to coals, but the stones of the hearth were still radiating heat. And he noted that the area around the cabin was strangely quiet. No birds, no insects, no small animals. Just silence. The same silence I'd experienced in the hollow. The same unnatural warmth from the stone arrangements. The same sense of something waiting, watching, trying to communicate. I started visiting the clearing regularly, not following the light. I knew the way now. Just hiking directly to the foundation and spending time there, trying to understand what had happened to the Zimmerman family. The light appeared sometimes, usually when I wasn't expecting it. It would manifest above the foundation, pulse for a few minutes, then fade away. Never threatening, never trying to lead me anywhere else, just making its presence known. The more time I spent there, the more comfortable I became with the strangeness. The cold and silence became familiar. The sense of being watched became almost companionable. I started talking to whatever was there, telling it about my work, about the forest, about the changes I'd seen over the years. I don't know if it understood me, but it seemed to listen. One night in late November, something different happened. I was sitting on the foundation, eating a sandwich and drinking coffee from my thermos, when the light appeared. But instead of pulsing above the stones, it descended slowly until it was hovering just a few feet in front of me. For the first time I could see it clearly. It was definitely a lantern. Antique glass chimney, brass fittings, a wick burning inside. But the wick wasn't consuming any fuel. There was no oil reservoir, no gas line, no visible source of combustion. The flame burned cleanly and steadily, producing light without heat, without smoke, without any of the byproducts of normal combustion. I reached out slowly, carefully, until my hand was just inches from the glass. I could feel no heat, no electromagnetic field, no vibration. But I could feel something else, a kind of recognition. Like the lantern was acknowledging my presence, accepting me as a witness to whatever was happening in this place. We stayed like that for almost an hour. Me sitting on the foundation, the lantern floating in front of me. Both of us perfectly still in the impossible silence of the hollow. I felt calmer than I'd felt in weeks, like I'd finally found the missing piece of a puzzle I'd been working on my entire life. Then the lantern began to move again. Not away from me this time, but around me, circling the foundation slowly, casting moving shadows on the stones. As it moved, I started to see things in the shadows, shapes that looked like people. A man, a woman, 3 children. They weren't solid, just darker areas where the light didn't reach, but they moved independently of the lantern, as if they were walking around the foundation on their own. I watched the shadow figures for several minutes. They seemed to be going about daily activities, the woman tending a fire, the man working, with tools, the children playing. Normal family life, played out in shadows and light. But gradually, the shadows began to change. They moved more slowly, more hesitantly. They gathered together in the center of the foundation, huddled close as if they were cold or frightened. Then, one by one, they began to fade. The children first, then the woman, finally the man. They didn't disappear suddenly. They just became less distinct, less defined, until they were indistinguishable from the other shadows cast by the trees. The lantern continued to circle the foundation, but now it was alone. I understood then what I was seeing. The Zimmerman family hadn't left the hollow in 1847. They'd never left. Whatever had happened to them, whatever had caused their disappearance, had trapped them here. The lantern was their lantern, the one they'd used to light their cabin on winter evenings. And somehow, it was still burning, still trying to guide them home. The light began to fade as the sky started to lighten in the east. Dawn was still hours away, but the lantern seemed to know that its time was ending. It made one final circuit of the foundation, then rose slowly into the air until it was hanging from the same hickory tree where I'd first seen it. The flame flickered once, twice, then went out. I sat on the foundation until true dawn, thinking about what I'd witnessed. When the sun finally came up, the clearing looked completely normal. Just an old stone foundation in a patch of woods, with nothing to suggest the impossible things that happened there after dark. I've continued my patrol since then, but I don't investigate the light anymore. I see it sometimes hanging in the hickory tree or moving through the forest, and I acknowledge it with a nod or a wave. It's become part of my routine now, as normal as checking the fire towers or monitoring radio traffic. Whatever the Zimmerman family became, whatever they're waiting for, it's not my place to interfere. The other rangers have started to notice the light too. A few have asked me about it, and I've told them it's probably campers or poachers. I file reports when I have to, describing routine patrols and normal conditions. I don't mention the temperature anomalies, the stone arrangements, or the shadow figures. That's between me and the hollow, but I've changed my patrol routes to include the clearing on a regular basis. Not to investigate or document anything, just to visit. To spend a few minutes on the foundation, drinking coffee and listening to the silence. Sometimes the light appears, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't matter. I know it's there and it knows I'm there, and that seems to be enough. The Forest Service is planning to expand the trail system through this area next year. They want to build a new campground, maybe a visitor center. When that happens, the clearing will be surveyed, mapped, and probably turned into a historical site. The foundation will be preserved, but the quiet will be lost. There will be plaques and interpretive signs and guided tours. The hollow will become just another stop on the tourist trail. I don't know what will happen to the light when that time comes. Maybe it will fade away like the shadows did. Maybe it will move deeper into the forest, looking for another quiet place to wait. Or maybe it will stay, burning silently above the foundation while visitors take photographs and read about the mysterious disappearance of the Zimmerman family. I hope it stays. Whatever those people became, they deserve to be remembered. Not as a mystery to be solved or a story to be exploited, but as a family that lived and worked and loved in that clearing for 2 years before something took them away from the world. The light is their monument, and as long as it burns, they're not completely gone. I've got 3 more years until retirement. 3 more years of patrols through the hollow. 3 more years of checking on the light. 3 more years of sitting on the foundation and listening to the silence. After that, someone else will take over this sector. I hope they're the kind of person who can accept a mystery without needing to solve it. The forest has enough room for one impossible thing. The light is there tonight. I can see it from my office window, hanging in the hickory tree like a yellow star. In a few hours, I'll hike down to the hollow and spend some time in the clearing. Maybe the shadows will appear again, maybe they won't. It doesn't matter. I'll sit on the foundation and drink my coffee and listen to the silence, and the Zimmerman family will know they're not forgotten. That's all any of us can ask for in the end. To be remembered. To know that someone, somewhere, is keeping watch over the places where we lived and loved and hoped. The light burns for all of us who've walked these trails, worked these forests, called these mountains home. It's not scary anymore. It's just lonely. And in the deep woods, on the long nights when the world feels too big and too empty, a little loneliness can be a comfort. The light knows I'm here, and I know it's there. And that connection is enough to keep both of us going through the darkness until dawn.